there's a huge inventory that's probably 15 years old of offshore discoveries. People know where fields are. And they've gone through repeated processes to re-engineer that, to get the cost down, to figure through that process. That process has dramatically changed in terms of how you develop a field, what the costs of the field are. And a lot of that has to do with design as much as it is. And it's also, you high grade. Where you might have had a field you might have produced 800 million barrels for, today you produce 500 million barrels. So it's going to cost you a lot less per incremental barrel of production. You're going to leave something behind, but it's okay because you're going to be able to get better economics in doing that. So, but yet it takes time for that process and the sanctions and the awards. And I guess my view on that is Subsea 7 and Technip FMC are the two companies that do offshore field development in a big way. And so I've been an investor for 25 years with the company. I know the senior management extremely well. And they have that front row conversation with those majors about projects they have and when they're going to develop them and where they are. And those companies are pursuing those projects and accelerating the development of those projects and the sanctioning of those projects. So I think the offshore, and the other thing about offshore, but as I said, if you drilled an offshore well 15 years ago, three things happened. One was you had a dry coal, and that would be bad. One was you had an oil well, and that would be good. And the other one was you had a gas well. Well, that's no good. If you're in some place like Mauritania, Mozambique, what are you going to do with gas? There's no domestic market. That's not true anymore. Offshore gas, you have refrigeration, you have LNG, so therefore you substantially increase the number of fields that can be economically developed today, especially given the outlook for LNG and the demand for LNG. So I would think of it as kind of the opportunity set is doubled from where it was offshore, because natural gas makes sense, even in stranded markets, right? If it's Egypt or Israel, there's a domestic market, you just put it on shore, but that was not the case in a place like Mauritania, Mozambique, there's no domestic market. It's okay, because I can get floating LNG and I can export it to Asia, or I can export it to Europe, so therefore that's a substantial increase. So that's what I see. There's a substantial amount of identifiable fields that are extremely economic, the dollars are there, the sustainability of the price is there, and the oil companies, including people like Shell and BP and all of the Europeans who supposedly don't want to be in the business, are accelerating the award of projects that they have, including things like Bonga Southwest in Nigeria, which has been a project that they've been looking at for 10 years. Shell's back at that project. So the majors are doing that. And the acceleration of projects offshore Brazil is dramatic. So the activity levels in Brazil are part of that equation, and there's a huge amount of increasing activity. What you also see is you see a lot of offshore Saudi activity. And so that goes to this issue of, one of the other things about oil is historically there's always been millions of barrels of excess supply, that therefore if there's a problem with some place you can bring it on. The excess supply of oil production today is extremely minimal. That's never happened in developed history. The idea that you have limited reserve is a very different scenario than it's ever been. And you see, I think the Saudis are terrible in terms of their own PR. People say like, oh, we tried to get the Saudis to put more oil, and they said no. Did you see how much money more the Saudis have they have authorized to spend to drill, to bring on new production? And part of that is they're looking at significant declines of their own production. They need to backfill that they have. That's what it is. Every oil and gas well depletes. It has to be replaced. So the depletion in places like Saudi is dramatic. And they're putting huge amounts of money in to maybe increase my productive capacity 1 million barrels. So all around the world, activity is increasing. And it's not, again, not just oil, because gas, because natural gas in the Middle East, if I can do that, I can displace oil and I can sell more oil. And so therefore, that's also part of the activity broadly on hydrocarbon development.
Here, I'll add to that. Just one thing. So in terms of the OPEC plus spare capacity, I totally agree. Obviously, the Russia issue is an issue as well in terms of there being insufficient service capacity right now, and the inability to transfer Western technology and people to Russia to get field development is going to be an issue. But there is this kind of just basic, there's the narrative of, hey, we won't spend any money. And then there's a reality, which is when you look at specifically the oil majors and the European oil majors, like Bob mentioned, they have depleting reserves. And so it's not even, so one clarification, even with all of these projects getting sanctioned, these aren't projects that are going to lead to global production growth. What they're going to lead to is lower production declines worldwide. And so we're not in the camp yet of, hey, we're gonna go drill these 10 offshore wells and actually grow our production. In many cases, it's just, hey, we're BP or Shell or whatever, and we're gonna go from declining our production and reserves 5 or 10% a year to 2 to 5% a year or something along those lines. So I think it's very important. They have this message of not growing production, and they have a commitment to their shareholders for ESG and other reasons, and they are actually mostly fulfilling that commitment. So there's both this ramp up and this sort of, which is dissonant from that other message, and the way they reconcile that is that they really just need it in order to sustain or just see lower production depletion levels and decline levels versus what they would have seen if they didn't engage in these activities. So again, just very important when you think about these ramp ups, you're having this almost weird thing that we've never seen before, where you're seeing activity ramp up to projected declines rather than to projected growth.